Aloha, everybody, and welcome to the Jason Jones Show. I am your host, Jason Jones, broadcasting to you. Today is May 15th, and it is the 77th anniversary of the Nakba, and I'm coming to you live to tape in Bethlehem, at the Bethlehem Bible College. I have to apologize first and foremost. I was in Paris shooting a film, and then I was in Rome for the conclave, so we haven't done a show in 3 weeks, but we are privileged to be back with you from Bethlehem with Reverend Munther, author of Christ in the Rubble. He is the pastor of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Bethlehem. We are coming to him from his studio. This is an audio show, but we have 3 cameras, and I'm a little nervous because I'm not that good looking. I have a great voice though. But Reverend Munther, I just showed up. I want to let you know, I just showed up, knocked on the door about 30 minutes ago, said, can I spend the night? And can I interview you in your studio? And Reverend Munther, you said sure. So thank you very much.
Sure. And don't worry, you look good.
So I don't know, I'm probably your only guest that just shows up and says, can I spend the night and use your camera equipment? So thank you for being
to be honest, these days we're not having any guests to begin with. I mean, with the lack of tourism, the siege we live in Bethlehem, I'm not talking about Gaza, I'm talking about Bethlehem. We're always welcoming to visitors, and more so in these days. So welcome to Bethlehem.
There was room at the inn.
There is room. There's plenty of rooms in the inn. I wish it was different. Yeah. I wish you would go through a more biblical experience of not having
have to sleep at
any room in the inns. But sadly, right now, there are plenty of rooms. We have no tourism, no visitors. You probably saw the streets very empty, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is a great tragedy. When I visited you in January, I could have the Church of the Nativity to myself for hours. In fact, I was there for hours alone praying at the very place of the Nativity on Orthodox Christmas. And they were having their Mass above me, but I was alone praying. And it was a beautiful experience, but it was also sorrowful because I know that the people of Bethlehem are suffering. And I'm excited to see you, but it's really a tragic day. And I'd like to talk to you about several things. I want to talk to you about the Nakba because most Americans have never heard of the Nakba. Most Christians haven't, most conservatives haven't. And if we have, it's usually from an American on the political left. We may have never met a Palestinian, or we may have never met a Palestinian Christian. So we're going to tune out whatever they have to say. But before we get to the Nakba, one of the things that I really want to talk to you about, and I have notes here, it's because it's something that I often have to struggle with as the president and founder of the Vulnerable People Project is, how do we advocate for vulnerable communities and treat them as an end in themselves? And it's usually challenging because you want to talk to power we want to communicate to power in the United States, whether it's the media, whether it's through politics or governance. We want to speak to the interests of power while being grounded in the interests of the vulnerable. It's always challenging. But it's specifically challenging for the Palestinians because the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has a lot of weight and influence in domestic politics. And so one of the things I'd like to ask you is, as a Christian, I don't want to exploit the Palestinian issue for domestic power, for domestic influence. And as a Christian, I don't want to advocate for Palestinians as maybe a statesman would or a politician would. So as a Christian, as a Palestinian from Bethlehem, pastorally, if you were talking to the church in the United States, would you have any advice for us on how we can advocate for Palestinians, thoughtful first and foremost of their interests, generally, and then as Christians, how do we advocate for Palestinian Christians?
Yeah. You touch on many things, Jason. You touch on many things, Jason. To begin with, the long systematic dehumanization of Palestinians, to the extent that many around the world find it even hard to sympathize, to even listen, to even accept that there's a different perspective because of this long. Because in most circles that you engage with, if you ask the question, what is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of Palestinians? It's probably negative. And this dismisses years of culture, of history, of beauty, and diversity that exists among Palestinians, or even the fact that Palestinian Christians exist. It's a very dismissive, I would even argue many times, racist attitude towards Palestinians, to the extent that they don't want to listen. And the second thing I think you touched on, which is important, is the fact that as Christians in particular, this is a very much moral, ethical, humanitarian concern when we talk about Palestinians. It seems to me that many times people want to immediately jump into a polarized political discussion and take sides without considering the facts, without listening to stories, without even walking in the shoes of Palestinians. To the extent that, many Americans I met who would come here and live for a few days will be shocked, and then their response is not, now we understand why Palestinians, are fighting against the occupation, but would say, maybe we would have done even worse things if we were walking in your shoes. So the challenge is, how do we make many around the world to jump into our position, to cross the divide? I always say to come to our side of the wall. And sometimes it takes courage. But it's very much part of our faith. Jesus said, whatever you have done to the least of these. And it seems to me when you talk about the Vulnerable Project or the least of these, in many ways, we Palestinians today find ourselves in that position. We're not perfect. We're not as if special, but at least treat us like any other people group and come and listen to our concerns and stories and try to walk in our shoes before making it this polarized political discussion. And God knows how many people I met who just assumed that because I belong to a certain political orientation group, then that means, for example, I must support Israel. That means I must, in other areas, it's as if, it's a package deal.
I call it right-wing intersectionality.
And many times this complexity comes with so much ignorance. To begin with, that there are Palestinian Christians. To begin with, what happened in 1948? What led to this moment? How is it like for us as Palestinians to live here today, to live in Bethlehem? The fact that we're just 15 minutes away from Jerusalem and cannot even get there. The fact that it takes me now 2-3 hours every day to go from Bethlehem to Ramallah on a checkpoint just to get from one Palestinian city to the other, and it has nothing to do with security. We know it's all about intimidation.
What breaks my heart, Reverend Munther, is I'll have to have a Palestinian friend in Jordan drive me to the border. Then I have to have one Palestinian friend pick me up on the Israeli side and drive me, and then I have to have another Palestinian friend meet me at the checkpoint and drive me into Bethlehem.
It's so much.
And they can't go where I can go. And I'm always embarrassed. And every time my Palestinian friend who dropped me off at the border in Jordan, he said, brother, I dream to go where you're about to go. I've dreamt it my whole life. He's 60 years old. I've dreamt it my whole life.
And many of them wish to pray in the Church of the Nativity or to pray in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Many of them, if you ask them, they would describe to you their family lineage, the history, the rootedness in the land, how much back they go to this land before they were dismissed, before they were displaced, became refugees in 1948, the Nakba again, and now are not even allowed to visit their homeland as tourists. I mean, just think of it. While watching not just pilgrims from all over the world come and pray and visit and drive freely in our land, where, as you said, some in Jordan or in Lebanon cannot even visit. We in Bethlehem cannot travel freely to in and out of Jerusalem. We also have to watch not just the pilgrims. We can watch Jews from all over the world come and settle in our land, take our land by force, and live in our towns, in our villages, or build settlements in our land. And all of this is treated as okay, and we are the problem for protesting this. And again, I wish people understand the reality as we experience it.
I think in the United States, it's just an attraction to power and a fear of power that silenced so many, especially those with political ambition. Something that I wrote an article called Help, I'm an Anti-Palestinian Bigot. I actually wrote this article when I sat down to write an article on analyzing if I had struggled with anti-Semitism, because a friend of mine said, because you're delivering food aid into Gaza and you're evacuating wounded Palestinian women and children, you're going to be labeled an anti-Semite. And I thought that's very odd because I bring food aid into Nigeria, into Afghanistan, into Iraq, into Syria, all over the world. Why, if I bring food into starving Christians in Gaza or evacuate wounded women and children and pregnant women, how could this lead to me being labeled an anti-Semite? And I thought, maybe I am. Maybe I have something. Let me write about it. And as I sat down to write the article, I thought about my experiences in Egypt as we were evacuating wounded Palestinian women and children and pregnant women. And in the interviews, I really discovered I don't really struggle with anti-Semitism, but I have been formed with deep prejudices against Palestinians. If you would have asked me 3 years ago, if I say Palestinian, you say what? Terrorist. Would have been the first word that, even when you said it, now it's the first word. Well, that's not by accident. We were formed with these deeply held prejudices. And so personally myself, I can say that I would have said 5 years ago, there was a land without a people. And we've been told that Palestinians are really just Arabs who came when the Jews arrived because they made it such a wonderful place to live. This is something I hear so many conservatives say. And they'll say it as just a fact, that there were no indigenous people there. And now they'll say actually that you were the invaders, that you invaded 2,000 years ago or 2,500 years ago, which is strange. Yeah. If we're going to go back that far, I guess all peoples on the world, no one is indigenous to where they're from. So I have to admit that I was formed this way. So when we talk about the Nakba, we haven't even heard of it. And if people have heard of it, it's going to be confusing to them because they really believe there was nobody here. So many people say there was nobody there, or they just arrived when the Jews came because they made it such a beautiful place to live. I don't even know if you've heard this.
Of course. It's the myth of an empty land that we always talk about. And I encourage everyone who listens to us to maybe pause this podcast for a minute and go and search on the internet Palestine before 1948. And then look at the galleries, the pictures, the images that you will find. Try even to search on Christmas in Bethlehem in the 19th century and see the pictures of Christmas in Bethlehem. Beautiful city with people coming from, small town of course, but people coming from all over the world, packed with people. Culture, life in Palestine, all before 1948. It's not just that it was not an empty land. It wasn't that there were scattered communities here and there. It was a thriving community. We had cities, we have trades, we had exports, we had a culture, we have theaters, we have...
we had airport and railroads.
Exactly. We had even, women photographers who would go and take pictures and exhibit them in a time, I think, when women were not even allowed to vote in the United States. Let's think of that. Palestine was flourishing as a community. And also was a diverse community. We had many Christians, much more than we have now, and people from other backgrounds. So this myth of an empty land is what we need to challenge. It's so dismissive of our history, our identity, and our belonging. Palestinians have long, the people of this land have for long self-identified as Palestinians. It's not as if we just invented the term Palestinian to counter. For 2,000 years maybe, this land was known in many history books, in all politics as Palestine. And the idea that the term is invented or that there is as we hear today by some, that there is no Palestinian people is, I would even argue, is a racist idea that challenges, that touches on our humanity and who we are as a people. And so when we talk about the Nakba, the important thing to highlight is that, to emphasize, is that Israel was not created on an empty land. Something had to give. Palestine was inhabited. This idea of the Zionist dream of creating a national homeland for the Jewish people has always faced this obstacle, as some Zionist leaders put it. Palestine is a beautiful bride, but it's already taken. So the idea was, how do we empty Palestine? They talked about transferring Palestinians. They planned it. They planned to find the right opportunity in history to push Palestinians out. And as some Palestinians would describe it, take as much geography as we can with little demography. So we want the land without the people. And in 1948, this is exactly what happened. Anything between 700,000 to 800,000 Palestinians were displaced from the land by force, became refugees.
Say that one more time.
700,000 to 800,000 Palestinians.
So if that's not ethnic cleansing, what would we call that?
That is the definition of ethnic cleansing, because it was planned, and it's 2/3 of our community. It's 2/3 of the Palestinians back then in 1948. Now, you have to understand something. Ethnic cleansing is a term that has a certain criteria and definition. One of them is intentionality, because some would argue war happens, people are displaced. This is not what happened, because they used to come and put people in buses and send them out. They used to use terror as a mechanism. So, go into a Palestinian village, kill people by the scores in front of people, and then spread the news, and then say, you're next, and then people would flee out of fear.
Now, this is going to be so hard for so many American Christians to believe.
But this is well documented through the testimonies of the Israelis who committed them, of the Zionists who committed them. So all of this, actually, we knew more about what happened in 1948. First, we knew about it from the survivors' testimonies. And unfortunately, this was dismissed as propaganda. But the testimonies were so, you would talk to one family here, another family there. You would go to this refugee camp and then go to another refugee, and the stories are the same.
And I've heard you say in other places, I heard Palestinian historians say in an interview with you that the term Nakba was actually created by the Zionists, saying if you don't leave, there will be a Nakba.
There will be a catastrophe.
And then there was
for
a
you.
catastrophe.
Yes, there will be a catastrophe for you, just like it happened with this village. This will be
so do this or else. The else happened, and it's still happening.
Yes.
I want you, one other point. As I was driving around, as I was going from Jerusalem to Haifa yesterday, I saw so much land where you could build settlements. And I wonder, why aren't they building there? Why do they have to build in the West Bank when there's so many places they could build?
There are two reasons.
Unless it's ethnic cleansing.
It's total control of the land. This is the concept, because that land they already have. So the purpose is not to help the, as they call it, population expansion. And a lot of that population expansion is actually by, pushing people from outside to come and immigrate to Israel. So they already have that land. So now settlements means land expansion, land confiscation, getting and grabbing more and more land. So that's why they're building the settlements. It's all designed for more control of the land. And we can't also deny that there is a religious component to it, because right now, whereas Zionism started as a secular movement many years ago, right now it's becoming increasingly a fundamentalist religious movement that look at the land in the West Bank as the jewel to have, as the biblical land, maybe more so than the coastal areas in comparison to the West Bank when it comes to the Bible. So many Zionist religious groups are pushing for more building settlements, stealing land from Palestinians in order to expand, but also to emphasize a religious identity, to the religious Jewish kind of identity of the land.
And so you said Bethlehem was a small Christian town at the time of the Nakba. What were the large Christian cities, and what happened to those Christian communities?
Yeah, there was a strong Christian presence in what is now known as Galilee, of course, Nazareth, Jaffa, Haifa, even Lyd. This is where there was a lot of Christians, including, by the way, West Jerusalem. So it was not East and West Jerusalem. It was always one Jerusalem, and Israel was able to occupy the first part, which is known now as the West Jerusalem, in 1948, and in doing so, expelling so many Palestinians and Palestinian Christians. A big number of Palestinian Christians became refugees in 1948. A very conservative estimate puts the number at 50,000, but some believe it's much more than that. A friend of mine was able to identify 30 Christian congregations and communities that no longer existed. We're not talking about the congregations that now were, stayed but lost a significant number, like Jaffa, Haifa. Talking about 30 Christian communities that no longer exist as a result of the Nakba in 1948. So a big number of Palestinian Christians were scattered all over the Arab world and then the globe. And the tragedy again is that now they cannot even come to visit, even as visitors to the land. If you go and take a tour right now and drive in what is known as West Jerusalem, you'll still find their homes. Of course, now inhabited by Israelis, but you will find the homes. And in fact, even in Jaffa Street, there is you would say this is the Sansour family house. This is we know the Christian families that owned these homes and were expelled in 1948.
When you tell that, it's so sorrowful. One of my favorite books, and it was a beautiful movie, it's called Sarah's Key. And it's about how the French willingly participated in stealing the homes of the Jews, like in Paris. And so Jewish families today, you will go to Paris to see where their families used to live. I see the same thing on social media where I will see Palestinian Americans, they will stand outside of the homes that used to be their families and take pictures. And it's just really, really hard for American Christians to comprehend because of the level of propaganda. Now, we were told it was a people without a land. I mean, it's just common sense tells me, I don't think I need to be a historian to say that Christians have been here for 2,000 years. It wasn't British missionaries that came here and converted you. It wasn't.
No. Actually, we would argue we converted the
I think that's a pretty good argument.
Mission that came from Jerusalem. It's a very problematic statement. The whole statement with its two parts. First of all, land without people. Even the second part, for people without a land. And I'm glad you mentioned about the French who stole the Jews' land, because the phrase "people without a land" is so anti-Semitic. To think that a Jew in the United States or in France is described as a person or a people without a land. It's as if they cannot live with us. That's the real anti-Semitism. That's the essence of the issue, in which, Western countries, Western civilization, and tragically for me, Christians, would not consider Jews to belong with them. They wanted them out. And so they were described, the Jews were described as people without a land.
And that was a European saying, yeah, you don't belong here.
Yeah.
I think of Hannah Arendt, who's someone who's greatly influenced me. She was a Zionist very early on, was captured by the Gestapo, managed to escape. Of course, she later on became a great advocate for the Palestinians and was disillusioned by Zionism. But she very much, like so many Jews in Europe, felt that they were German or that they were Polish, that they were Ukrainian, that they were French or that they were American.
Yeah.
And they felt rejected. And someone that's really even influenced me greatly is the British Catholic writer who I adored, G.K. Chesterton. But he did advocate for the state of Israel, but almost kind of as an anti-Semitism, because he also advocated that Jews should wear Middle Eastern clothes so he could recognize that they were different as they walked around the UK.
And Balfour, with the Balfour Declaration, didn't want Jews in England, he would not welcome Jews who are refugees from Eastern Europe to come to England. I mean, it's unthinkable to me that, and all of this now, you think many in the West would call out Palestinians and anti-Semitic just for rejecting the concept of a land without a people, because we live here, this is our land. And while those who expelled and massacred 6 million Jews now appear or want to appear self-righteous.
You look at Germany, they're obnoxious with this.
Yes. And this is, by the way, also why we're seeing an increasing number of European Jews and American Jews saying not in our name. We know this. We can't accept this. And I don't think that these, as often described, that these are secular left-wing Jews who are just, being in the left. I think many of them are hugely influenced by their experience, the experience of their ancestors, and by, I would argue, even biblical ethos for justice and concern for the poor, for the marginalized, for the oppressed. And sadly, many times these Jews are being dismissed by the very same Christians we're trying to reach out to.
Yeah, I think of the great Dave Smith, who's a right-leaning,
That's one
alt-right
example.
libertarian. To me, he's just a hero. Norm Finkelstein, Noam Chomsky, the loudest and clearest voices in the United States that advocate on behalf of Palestinians are Jewish. And I'd also say I was really grateful. There was a recent study that came out that the majority of American Christians don't accept the Trinity. So I would say that means the majority of people in the United States who claim to be Christian are not. But I was listening to the great N.T. Wright's Paul. There's a lecture. I travel, so I read a lot and I listen to a lot of lectures.
It's good to know you listen to Anglicans and
listen to you
Evangelicals.
quite a bit as well. And to my Catholic audience, don't get mad at me. But N.T. Wright, listen to he has a great lecture on the Trinitarian theology of Paul. I fell asleep to his lecture on the Trinitarian theology of Paul. N.T. Wright, if you're listening, don't be offended. I fall asleep too often, not because I think it's because you're comforting, but then I woke up to him being interviewed on Gaza. I would have been afraid to even look to think what an Anglican Brit would be saying about Gaza. But I was pleasantly startled to see that he is a great advocate for the Palestinians. He's sort of like the living C.S. Lewis. And he says that his advocacy was birthed as a young man in 1989, I believe, when he lived
in
here
Jerusalem, yes.
in Jerusalem, and his son, he had mentioned in his talk that one of his children, I think it was one of his sons, is texts his father every day. So we see in the United States, we see across the political spectrum, from left to right, Catholics, evangelicals, mainline Protestants, Jews, and others advocating for the Palestinians. So this is something that's very hopeful to me. But what you find is those that advocate for the Palestinians so oftentimes have been here.
Yes.
And those who haven't may have been here once on a tour that was arranged by a powerful special interest to influence their thoughts and then to deploy them as advocates.
Because pilgrimage, unfortunately, and these special tours play a role. As a friend of mine always says, we gain enemies from these pilgrimages because they spend zero, if any, time on the Palestinian side and only fed information about Palestinians without meeting Palestinians through the Israeli tour guides or the, certain tour agents in America or Europe who have interest.
NGOs that will pay for you.
Many times it's
offered
NGO.
so many free tours.
Oh my goodness!
To come
all
here,
the time.
to be formed as a young conservative. When I was a young conservative activist, and through my career, constantly being offered paid first class accommodations. I want to say I got to pay my own way here. The Palestinians aren't funding NGOs sending people here. That's just not happening. So yeah, that's.
I mean, even if we wanted, we can't afford it. We don't have the resources. And think similarly of the impact of groups like AIPAC on American politicians. I have known a certain American clergy who visited, who understood, who saw, who advocated for Palestine and then ran for the Congress and immediately was sponsored by AIPAC and flipped into becoming a Zionist. So we cannot underestimate the impact of AIPAC on American politics.
A Christian human rights activist said to someone who works for me, who toured the West Bank with Palestinian Christians, went back, wrote a report advocating for Palestinian Christians, but then quickly flipped. And he had said to actually a mutual friend of ours, this, I wouldn't call him prominent, but works for a well-funded organization, said to a mutual friend of ours, got really mad and said, well, I have a family to feed. I need a career.
Yeah.
I would rather live under a bridge in a cardboard box with my family than to get paid to abandon vulnerable descendants from the families that were in the upper room when the Holy Spirit descended. I can tell you that.
And we see this, to be honest, because To be honest, we're being betrayed. I would use this word. We're being betrayed by, if I think of the American spectrum, by people on both sides of the camp. We're being, betrayed by many who care much for the Christian cause and mission and the church, but when it comes to this land, could care less for Palestinian Christians or even preserving a Christian presence in Bethlehem, in Jerusalem, because of this ideological support to Israel. A lot of times, as you know, there is theology in it. And honestly, we're also being betrayed by many so-called progressive, liberal, even well-informed activists, media people, theologians, church leaders, who are, progressive and talk on everything with the exception of Palestinians, would always put us aside, would not risk as if talking. And I wonder what's behind it. I think of, very influential and mainstream comedians with late night shows who seldom bring Palestine.
I'm going to mention one by name. As a Catholic, is he brands himself as a social justice Catholic. It's Stephen Colbert. Never once.
If he brands himself as a social justice person, I mean, he seldom brings Palestine into the discussion. And you have to wonder why.
Jewish comedian does. Jon Stewart.
Jon Stewart does, of course.
Yeah, very brave.
And the thing about someone like, because you mentioned many, Jon Stewart is well informed, and he brings logic, he brings passion, and he's clearly concerned for Jews even in this land. He wants to see people living together side by side. It's not as if he wants the destruction. It's not as if he wants this. And this is the myth that if you speak for Palestinians, then you want the destruction of Israel. If you say, freedom for Palestinians or whatever slogan you use, it's always purposefully interpreted as they're calling for the destruction of Israel. No, they're not. They're calling for the end of injustice against Palestinians. They're calling for equality between Palestinians and Israelis, Christians, Jews, and Muslims. It's the only way forward. And so, as he said, it's disturbing to me to see people on both sides of the camp completely ignore us. At the same time, it's good to see, as you said, we're getting more friends. More than ever, I think, people are beginning to realize we've had it wrong on Palestine for years, and we need to rethink.
And I had it wrong. And even after understanding, and I know you have very limited time. I want to get to two more points, though. But I had it wrong, and I even would wrestle with, and mentors and donors would say to me, Jason, it's not that you're wrong on Gaza, but it's that you're going to limit your ability to do work in Afghanistan and Nigeria and in Sudan, and because you're luring yourself into this murky, dangerous area. And I thought about that a lot, but I realized if I can't speak up here, I should never speak up anywhere.
Exactly.
And whatever the consequences are, let those consequences come. I don't mind to be in solidarity with the vulnerable. As the great French Catholic anthropologist René Girard said, is to become as vulnerable as them. And so, but I even had to weigh it. And I did think, like, this is going to limit my advocacy for the Uyghurs. It's going to limit, and different people from different communities that I serve would say, Jason, don't do this. It's going to limit your ability to advocate for us. And I would think maybe, but so what?
But you see, I thank you for bringing this up. I think this is extremely important because, first of all, you're absolutely right. I mean, can I speak of injustice here and be silent of injustice there? What does this do to my credibility? Can I claim to be a champion for social justice, yet ignore this huge injustice, historic injustice that Palestinians are going through? Does this, I think this impacts a person's credibility if you are silent on one issue completely. And I think on the other side, I think this is really important. What this means is that you're also bowing to the power of those who dictate where to speak and where not to speak. So it's as if they will tell you, we will continue to support you as long as you support this community, but not that community. So again, we're serving a certain agenda of the powerful. We're letting the powerful dictate our agenda as faith-based activists, not just human rights activists. I don't think, as faith-based activists, we're getting our agenda from those who have money and power. to the extent that, okay, we'll speak on this cause because you want us to speak on it, but we'll stay silent on this cause. And then we tell ourselves, well, at least I'm speaking on this cause, so why risk that? And I know a time will come to speak on that cause. And one final thing I would add is what I think it was a German pastor, or I forgot, in the Second World War, who said first they came for the socialists and we did nothing. They came for the communists, and I said, and then they came for the Jew, and I said nothing. And then they came for me, and there was no one else to help me. So if we're silent over our principles, what we think is wrong, just for pragmatism, I think it will ultimately come back to haunt us and haunt our credibility. And again, can we claim to be people of faith, advocating on faith base if we do so?
Well, as a Catholic, I'm going to quote Martin Luther to a Lutheran pastor. One of my favorite quotes is from actually Martin Luther, when he said, if you preach the gospel everywhere and all the time, except for where the devil and the world attack, you preach the gospel not at all. And I think that if I advocate for the vulnerable everywhere and all the time, except where it comes at a social cost, then I speak for the vulnerable not at all. And
well, you quoted Luther just so that you know, we've been quoting Pope Francis, and hopefully Pope Leo the 14th now even more. I mean,
maybe
we're very, you know,
can I end with
it's very encouraging. Of course.
I want you to start. He was on Twitter yesterday, or X, relentless. And he's from 2 blocks from where I grew up. His favorite pizza place. If you could, can you read him on Twitter?
Yeah.
I'm wearing a Chicago White Sox hat, not for him. I had this in Rome at the conclave. I never imagined there'd be a Chicago White Sox fan as Pope. And I was actually in Rome praying for Pizza Balla. I was so excited. I was shooting a movie in Paris. I went to Rome just so I could be there to pray and be there when Pizza Balla was the next Pope. And then lo and behold, no, it was my neighbor whose favorite pizza place is Aurelio's Pizza, which was my first job. It was also the first place that fired me. You have to know, Reverend.
Wow.
They fired me because they found out I lied about my age. I was 13 and I told them I was 15. I wasn't old enough to work. So it wasn't as if I wasn't doing my job. But could you read some of his posts? You brought him up, and I'm so pleasantly surprised and overjoyed.
Look at that. And maybe he doesn't, the new Pope, not necessarily mentioning Palestine in just reading some of his recent post. But
he mentioned it in his first address, Gaza.
Yeah, definitely. Look at this. War is never inevitable. My goodness. I wish, you know, we put this on a slogan everywhere. I know many politicians who don't like this. I know many who sell weapons who don't like this. War is never inevitable. Amen to that.
Yeah.
Weapons can and must fall silent. Amen to that. For they never solve problems, but only intensify them. Those who sow peace will endure throughout history, not those who reap victims.
That's very clear.
It is.
I think it's pretty obvious what he's saying there.
Others are not enemies to hate, but human beings with whom to speak. This is very inspiring. It's very true. It's very Christ-like. And we need faith leaders like this on all levels, not just the Pope, on all levels. We need faith leaders who speak with courage, who challenge this ideology of violence and power, and who push us to see the others as humans, and who would continue to preach and say and advocate that war is never inevitable. Amen to that, you know, it should be the other way around. Peace is always our number one priority. So, you know, you quoted Martin Luther. Believe me, we've been very inspired by Pope Francis, and the first week of Pope Leo XIV is really, you know, inspiring. And maybe I'll end with this. You know, many media outlets reached out to me. You know, I've been speaking on Gaza a lot, and Pope Francis spoke on Gaza. And after he died, they reached out to me asking me, you know, what's the legacy of Pope Francis to Palestinians. I mentioned when he prayed at the wall, just a few meters from where we are speaking right now, and then his constant communication with Gaza and what it means for us as Palestinians. And then they would ask me, what do you want to see in the new Pope? And of course, you don't want a Lutheran pastor commenting on, the Catholic Church. And I said, regardless of who is chosen to become the next Pope, and now we know who was chosen. But then I said, regardless, I think the legacy of Pope Francis is for each one of us to follow. And I think rather than, and that's what I told the media, maybe 4 or 5 of them, rather than speculating about who's coming next, which direction the Catholic Church is going, I hope we all think, how can we follow in the footsteps of Pope Francis, thinking of the poor, the vulneralized, the marginalized, the vulnerable people, prioritizing them in the ministry of the church. That's the legacy. And that's exactly the kind of faith leaders we need in our world. And definitely these are the kind of faith leaders, church leaders we need for the global church. And so we're praying for Pope Leo, not just that he brings Christian unity, but also that he continues in that path of prioritizing the vulnerable and the marginalized as the target of our Christian witness and ministry.
Well, and I would like to ask you, Reverend Munther, to remember us in prayer, because the reason I'm really here is we have trucks ready to go into Gaza. They've been ready to go for 3 months. We have 3 trucks that we're delivering, one in honor of Pope Francis. We're doing another big truck in honor of Pope Leo. We're printing Chicago White Sox banners that are going to be on the trucks going into Gaza. And the other leader in the world who has spoken surprisingly, I think, to many, but not to me. And in fact, when I was here in January, I said that I think that we're going to have a good president who's going to be advocating for peace in Gaza. And President Trump has been very clear that he wants this war to end. He wants the blockade to end, and he wants food. He said very clearly he wants food and medicine to go in. So we're going to have a truck going in with Trump banners, a truck going in with White Sox banners, and another truck going in with Pope Francis papal insignia on it. And so I just pray that we get those trucks in today, tomorrow. I'm here. I'm ready to meet the trucks as they enter Gaza, to join the trucks and to go in to meet the Christian community there. And I would ask for your prayers in that. And thank you for your voice.
Amen. And we need every aid to enter Gaza as soon as possible. Can you imagine? It's been 2 months of total blockade. So thank you. And we hope more of that happens. We need more pressure on Israel to allow aid to enter. That's what we need more than anything at this moment. So thank you.
It's the mystery of collective punishment. I wrote an article. It's saying it's a mystery that it's the Semitic peoples, it's the Jews and the Palestinians, and different ideological sides that think it's acceptable to collectively punish those communities. We don't believe in collective punishment. We're Christians, and so we're here to pray that we're praying that we get those trucks in. Now, I know you're thinking the whole time, because I'm a father, I have to pick my kids up from school. I see it in your eyes. So I'm going to end very quickly. Reverend Munther, thank you very much.
Thank you
for letting me spend the night. Let me use your camera crew. And I just want to say to the Jason Jones Show audience, I want to thank you for making it possible. I just returned from Jordan. I inspected the warehouses, our trucks, and our food, and our medicine, and our diapers for children, for the elderly, and it's all ready to go. So please pray for us. And if you want to continue to support our work, this podcast, The Jason Jones Show, is brought to you by the Vulnerable People Project. Our mission is to stand in solidarity with the most vulnerable people in the world when the world has abandoned them. And the most vulnerable people in the world right now are in Gaza. They're in Sudan. They're in Chinese-occupied East Turkestan. There are Afghan allies in our safe houses in Central Asia as wars breaking out between India and Pakistan. If you want to stand in solidarity with them, go to our website, vulnerablepeopleproject.com, and become a monthly donor. And when you do that, you can know that through your prayers and through your support, you are living a life in solidarity with the most vulnerable people in the world. And what better way to share the gospel of Jesus Christ, to stand with those that the world has forgotten. Thank you. And thank you, Reverend Munther.
Thank you.